We will get started then. Welcome to the News Tribune sponsored candidate forum for Senate District 7 here in Duluth. Republican Donna Bergstrom and DFLer Erik Simonson are here. Our editorial board members will ask the questions. You'll each get a minute to answer, and then we'll offer 30-second rebuttals if you want them. If you don't, that's fine. But our editorial board members, Classy Dudley and Bernard Swanham, are citizen representatives on the board. Chris Varican is an employee representative on the News Tribune editorial board, and our publisher, Neil Ronquist, is also on the board, of course, and I'm Chuck Frederick, the editorial page editor. The purpose of these forums is twofold. Our first mission is always to inform the electorate about the candidates, the issues, and also our editorial board will be drawing from this forum as we make our endorsement decisions. With that said, we'll get started. I welcome those in attendance. I welcome those watching online at DuluthNewsTribune.com. And we'll begin by offering each candidate up to 1.5 minutes to introduce yourself, maybe tell us why you're running, your qualifications, and Donna, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. So, Bonjour, Anishinaabe, Donna Bergstrom Indigenous, Isqua, Gamiwi, Zaga Eganig, Indunjaba, Megisi and Dudam, Chimigwich Kichimanidu, Chimigwich Duluth News Tribune and the editorial board. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for this Duluth News Tribune forum. My name is Donna Bergstrom, and I'm the endorsed Republican candidate for State Senate District 7. I grew up just down the road in Carleton, Minnesota, and graduated from Carleton High School in 1981. I retired from the United States Marine Corps Reserve right here in Duluth in 2010 as a lieutenant colonel, having served 20 plus years on and off active and reserve assignments as an intelligence officer. And I'm so happy to be back to the community that I know and love. I'm an enrolled member of the Red Lake Nation. My mother was born and raised there. And I greeted you this evening in Ojibwe-Moan, not as a native speaker, but one who is learning it for the first time from my niece. So thank you, Zebans. I said my name. I'm a member of Red Lake. I'm a member of the Eagle Clan. I thank the creator in the Duluth News Tribune. I have a BA degree in political science from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and a Master of Jurisprudence degree from Loyola University Chicago. I'm running for you to bring your voices, values, and priorities to the state level. I view my running as an extension of my commitment to public service and as my support for the Constitution. I'm not a politician, but a common citizen who is concerned over the direction of the state, just like you. I look forward to our facilitated discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My apologies, I forgot to introduce Tina Gaida. She's also works for the News Tribune, and as you can see, she's on the stopwatch, and will be holding up signs to let you know how much time you have so you can wrap up. DFL candidate Erik Simonson.
Thank you, Chuck, and I just want to thank the News Tribune and the editorial board for having us tonight. I think this is always a good experience, and it's good to get the word out there and make sure that people understand who it is that they're voting for and what their choices are, so I appreciate the opportunity. Again, my name is Erik Simonson. I'm the DFL and labor endorsed candidate running for the Senate District 7. I was first elected to the Minnesota House serving West and Central Duluth in 2012, where I've served for the last 4 years. I decided to run for the Senate seat when Senator Reinert announced early in January that he wasn't going to run, and have been working to learn the east side of Duluth as well as the west side ever since then, and it's been a really incredible opportunity. I've lived my entire life in the city of Duluth. I work for the city of Duluth as a firefighter, where I've worked for the last 26 years, currently serve as an assistant chief. I've got a bachelor's degree in management from the College of St. Scholastica, and I'm just really excited about taking everything that I've learned in the House of Representatives and applying it over in the Senate, working with our great delegation to get some good things done for the city of Duluth. We've got some challenges ahead of us, no doubt. I've served 2 years in the majority party, and I've served 2 years in the minority party. So I've formed a lot of relationships, and I look forward to putting those relationships to work as I move over into the Senate in January, and with your support, I'll be able to do that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Our first question will be asked by Classy, and Erik, you can answer first, please.
This year's legislative session ended without a bonding bill, without transportation funding, without an increase in local government aid, and with other failings. What could have been done differently?
Well, there's a couple of things that could have been done differently, and you're right, it ended in an absolute failure, and I think if you ask the majority of legislators, that they would tell you that they were equally as frustrated, I think, as many Minnesotans are. 2 things I would say. If you go back to the 13 and 14 session when the Democrats were in charge, we didn't have these failures. We completed our work on time. We did a lot of good work on behalf of Minnesota, And as we moved into the 15 and 16 session, the difference is that Republicans took control of the House of Representatives. You can't necessarily blame all of that on the GOP party, but that is the one thing that's different from that session to this current session. But I will say this, the system is broken. There's definitely some opportunity to put some reforms in place that would help smooth out the end of session so that things weren't done at the very last minute, and so that things aren't done between 1 and 2 and 3 people decided in the last hour of session. That is probably the worst way to do business, whether you're in government or not, and we know that it didn't work.
Thank you, Donna.
Sure, I think I, like many of you, were really disappointed at the end of that legislative session. I like to equate it to the military. If that was a military operation, you would have been relieved of command because you didn't accomplish your job. So when I take on this responsibility, I take it seriously, and I take it as my job to get things done. So getting things done means building relationships and having relationships with individuals and looking towards things that will compromise. One of the most important ways to build relationships is to build trust with one another. And so how do you build trust with one another is you have honesty and integrity and you lead from the front. So I think this was a failure of our leadership. It really was problematic that we didn't get those bills passed. And I think one of the things the governor could have done is called a special session and brought everybody back in for 10 minutes and fixed that typo and then passed the bill and then dismissed everybody or ended the session. So I think that was really a missed opportunity on the part of our governor. Thank you.
Your sponsor?
Just to the point about the typo was only involving the tax bill. We had a lot of problems with the bonding bill, and those two really got kind of tied together as one should pass if the other one comes with it. But there was a typo in the tax bill. The tax bill would have been good to pass, but the bonding bill was filled with flaws, and there was a lot more to it than just one simple 10-minute special session could have solved.
Well, bonding bill, I mean, again, that's part of their job. That's what the whole session was pointed towards, is that's the bonding session. And again, the work wasn't done, so that was a failure of leadership.
Very good. We'll move on to Vern.
How do you support funding bridge and highway maintenance? An increase in the gas tax, a miles driven tax, cutting other things from the state budget, some other strategy, or a combination?
Donna, begin with you.
Well, you know, the transportation funding, and I went to the Department of Transportation's website, and, you know, if you go there, you can see how all the money is allocated, and there's basically the 3 streams. And again, you know, I'm not a politician, so I'm learning as I go here. But the gas tax, the new car sales tax, and the license tax fee, I think we all agree are good sources of revenue for that, and they're good sources for us to continue using. I think moving it up and having a gas tax increase is going to be problematic for a lot of our folks that rely on rely on the transportation either for their small business or for their personal use. And I think bonding, if we look at bonding is debt. So we need to be very mindful of when we take on additional debt and whether that's good for our community. I think funding from the budget surplus could have gone to transportation, and that's something that we could have looked at as an option for our transportation.
A combination of things.
Combination of things, yes. Thank you.
I think if there's a surplus scenario set up again come 2017, there's an opportunity for a combination. I do think that there's an appetite for spending some of the surplus on certain transportation projects, but there are 201 legislators, and I think every one of them will tell you that we need to invest in transportation. The real question comes down as to how do we generate this revenue, this new revenue to invest in transportation. I did a poll in my legislative district earlier this year when we were still in session. The House and the Senate did individual polls at the state fair this year. And by and large, the majority of Minnesotans, whether it's those that attended the state fair or the 800 and some that I polled in my district, by and large, they support an additional dime gas tax. And we need another $600 million a year to invest into roads and bridges statewide. There's no question about that. Everybody agrees on that. It's just a matter of how do we do that. So if there's a surplus combination, in the absence of a surplus, I would absolutely support a gas tax.
Sure, Donna?
Just to point out that in fiscal year 2015, the transportation funding was $3.28 billion. So that's a lot of money, and there's probably room for, you know, efficiencies in that. And so if we go beyond that, we need money beyond that. Again, I think we need to really have the conversation about how we're going to be efficient in, you know, getting that extra money.
Sure. Erik, 30 seconds.
To the point about efficiencies, I think it's really important to point out that for the last number of years, well, even since I've been elected in the last 4 years, we've had, mayors of small cities and big cities. We've had business, we have chambers of commerce, we've had labor, we have citizens groups, we have legislators that have all come together and said, we support, new revenues going into transportation. So I think the efficiencies, there may be some, but certainly not to the tune of $600 million a year. And we really need to fix this problem going forward, and that's what we need to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Move on. Chris?
Rural broadband has been a stated priority in St. Paul that never seems to get adequate funding. How big a priority is it to you and why?
Erik?
So in 2013, I carried the first rural broadband bill when broadband wasn't cool. But it really is an economic development tool is what it's meant to be. It's not about making sure that everybody has internet at their cabins, or at their place at the lake. It's really about making sure that our first of all, our regional centers are built out with adequate broadband. And beyond that, the stretches in between our regional centers. We have a lot of talent in our state that is just not able to reach out and communicate the way that they're used to communicating. The millennial generation is so used to being able to do everything online, and if they can't access adequate broadband, they're really at a disadvantage. And if we talk about why people leave their communities and move to the metro, that's a primary reason. So we need to invest more money, and we need to convince other legislators that this is a good idea. We did $20 million the first year when I carried that bill. Last year, or actually in 2015, we did a combination of different things and got another $30 million in.
Donna, is it a high priority for you?
Yes, absolutely, and I agree with that. The broadband is important for our businesses and our families. I have friends out in Bergstrom, Minnesota that don't have internet access out there, and they should could use it. What I'm concerned about is how we go about implementing that. And what I don't want to do is create a 20th century solution for a 21st century problem. So there are technology advances that we could use, such as broadband over power lines or microwave. So I would hope that we would look at how we can, solve this problem with a 21st century solution rather than just putting money at a solution that worked back in the 20th century. So, thank you.
Good. Sounds like you're both kind of on the same page, but Erik?
Yeah, I'd just like to tag on, when we created in 2013 the Office of Broadband, one of the main pieces of this, main components of this legislation was that anything that this grant money's paid for, the components that were put into the ground, the fiber, if you will, had to be scaled to 100 megabits per second. So we built it, scaled it in such a way that it would go well into the future, with the idea that if we're going to invest public dollars, it needs to be spent wisely.
Okay. Donna?
Just
Good.
again, the emerging technologies, might not be fiber, it might be, broadband over power lines.
Sure,
Or,
sure.
yeah, so.
All right, very good. Classy?
How can state investments in education be more equitable? And what can the state do to help districts close the achievement gap?
Donna, it's your turn to go first.
My turn. Okay, education. Well, that's one of my top priorities. So thank you for that question. I think that education is really important for our communities, and we need to make sure that we have the proper funding for that, but we also need to make sure that we're not leaving communities behind. And as you know, in Minnesota, we're second worst in the nation graduating our Native American students. So basically half of this room is not going to graduate and will probably spiral down into poverty and have health concerns and not have good jobs. And so how do you close the achievement gap is that you engage the communities and you ask them, what do you need and how are you going to bring up your levels? And if you look down to Cloquet, what they did is they incorporated some of the Ojibwe curriculum into their classrooms and hired more staff that looked like the students, and they were able to increase their outcome by about 10%. So they graduated about 59% of the students. I think parents' choice is very important for their children's education. So I would absolutely support parents' choice and any type of tax credit for that. I think we know that research shows that if you can cap your K through 3, you're going to have better outcomes. So I would cap our K through 3.
Thank you so much. Erik?
I think education is incredibly important. In fact, I think just about every lawmaker would tell you that it's the most important priority for the future of Minnesota. We invest 40% of our state budget in E12 education. And the question is, what do we do to make sure that more individuals graduate from high school? And the fact of the matter is, if you look at our public schools here in Duluth, which is where this Senate district encompasses, our class sizes are too large for today's society. That is the real problem. Our teachers don't have the opportunity to spend quality time with students that need additional help. So we need to make sure that we put additional funding into our formula so that we can reduce these class sizes, and we need to work with the school districts and, make sure that we're putting money in the right places through the formula so that we can reduce the class sizes. We need to increase the number of counselors in our school, because this is a real problem that the school district, ISD 709, is not necessarily able to meet for every student. And in order to keep people in school and graduating, we need to make sure that we can do that.
Donna, would you like to address any of that?
Yeah, and just to say that, I'm very proud to be from the state of Minnesota that passed the first charter school legislation. And the intent of charter schools was to create models that would help our public schools, either from an innovative lab type approach or from a competitive approach. So I think we need to look for our charter schools too.
And to that point, charter schools are public schools. They are publicly funded. They're no different than the ISD 709, other than the way that their boards are structured. But I think it's important to point out that I'm not suggesting that we just throw more money into the formula. We need to make sure that we're getting results. But the key is our teachers. We need to give them the adequate tools that they need to actually work with students to make sure that they're staying in school and that they end up graduating.
Thank you very much. Moving on, Vern, question number 5, please.
Health insurance costs are skyrocketing and insurance companies are bailing. Should Minnesota abandon MNsure and move to the federal exchange? Or how can MNsure and access to health insurance be improved in Minnesota?
Mr. Simonson.
Yeah, healthcare is not one of my top issues by any means. I don't sit on any of those committees, but I can say this, that as I sat through the 13 and 14 session with Representative Huntley at the time, I learned a lot about MNsure in our state healthcare system, and I learned a lot about the federal exchange program. And we also know that now Governor Dayton has established this task force that has done tremendous work and come up with a lot of suggestions about how do we make it better here in Minnesota. And the fact of the matter is that we have more people have insurance today than have ever had before in our history in the state of Minnesota, and I find that to be a good thing. If we want to look at reducing costs globally into the future, we need to make sure that people have insurance and that they're getting, regular access to health care. But I think this task force is going to reconvene soon. In fact, they're still meeting now, but I think after the first of the year, they're going to continue to meet. And going backwards to the federal exchange, let's say, throwing out MNsure and going back to the federal exchange would actually cost Minnesotans more money, so that's not a good idea.
Bergstrom.
Yes, I had the pleasure of working at the Fond du Lac Care Clinic here in Duluth, the Center for American Indian Resources, where I was able to assist anecdotally hundreds of people. I don't think we kept statistics until closer to the end of when I was working there. So I was able to help many people get on health care, and that was very rewarding. And it was a very nice thing to do. I liked MNsure. MNsure was a very good program prior to Affordable Care Act. When we started shifting towards that Affordable Care Act, the models were built so that people could be at home and surf the internet with their bunny slippers and pick some insurance that worked for them. Well, the majority of the people that we worked with didn't have a living room, let alone bunny slippers and computers. So that wasn't thought through. And so when we talk about these programs, you need to talk about who the user is and who your intended program is for and how are they included in the conversation. So I know that now we have over 1 million Minnesotans enrolled in state public programs, but as I've been door knocking, all I've been hearing from people is that the premiums are too high, the cost of seeing their doctor is too high, and I'm sorry, but I had a young college graduate tell me she's never going to a doctor again after she got her first bill. So, thank you.
Eric, final thoughts on MNsure?
Yeah, I think, anytime you roll out something the size of the Affordable Care Act nationwide, it's going to be complicated. It's going to be a challenge. And anytime you roll out something as large as MNsure for the state of Minnesota, you're going to have those same challenges. I think a lot of those things are being worked through. I think that there is a future of improvements ahead of us, and I think, as we go forward into the subsequent years, that we will see improvements and that things will start to get better. But you cannot deny the fact that more people have insurance now than ever before.
Donna, final thought?
I would just say, going back to that military model, you would have been relieved of command. So thank you.
The next question will be asked by Chris.
Was the governor wrong to withdraw Twin Metals mineral lease? Why or why not, and where do you stand on precious metals mining in Minnesota?
Donna, we'll begin with you.
Well, I certainly can't speak for the governor. I think, from my citizen's perspective, I thought that wasn't, a very conscientious thing for him to do from our perspective. Because there are agencies in place that are responsible for the processes. And for him to send that letter in just sort of disavowed all the work that those agencies have done. And these are taxpayer-funded agencies, so I think the process should have been allowed to run, and that we should have let it, see where it was going to end up, rather than the governor influencing in that way. So again, I don't want to speak for him, but from a citizen perspective, I didn't think that was the right thing to do.
Thank you, Eric.
I would agree, I don't want to speak for the governor, but I will say this, it is the governor's prerogative. And I think it was incredibly wise of him to say, look, you're early in the process, this is what my absolute position is. I think by not coming out and saying that he was in opposition to it, that he would have allowed that company to just continue on with the assumption that perhaps something was going to happen. If he has already made up his mind that it's not going to happen, then I think it was smart of him to do that. And I think that's where you see the difference between Twin Metals and the PolyMet project. He's not come out and said, we are not going to approve the permit for PolyMet, because that is so far along in its process, and I think that's also smart of him. Personally, I agree with the governor on his statement about Twin Metals. And I think as I've knocked across East Duluth and met so many people that agree with that it's the proximity to the boundary waters and the Superior National Forest and the Lake Superior watershed is too much of a risk, and that's where I stand.
I'd just like to say this is, obviously an extremely difficult decision, and it's one that has to balance our natural resources against, minerals and resources that we need for our infrastructure and for our people. And folks up there really need jobs. And one of the things that this would be able to do is provide a viable economy up there. So again, I think one of the things that we need to focus on too is finding alternative economic diversity up on the range.
Eric, what about that issue on jobs?
I think the jobs is incredibly important, and that is the absolute issue, because the Iron Range is needing jobs. We've got the steel industry that is cyclical by nature, and it's up and downs, and we've all watched this over the last few years, and we're familiar with it. But the reality is that, yes, they need jobs. Perhaps it's not those particular jobs, but perhaps there is opportunities in other industries. And I would support this, that we look at expanding ideas and expanding other alternatives for different business on the Iron Range. We can do that. We have the ability to do that in the state of Minnesota right now, so I would support that.
Back to Classy with a nice short question.
What should be done with the state budget surplus?
Eric, we'll start with you.
Well, I think the special session door is closed, so what surplus we deal with come January remains to be seen. We've got the November forecast, the February forecast. We'll see where we shake out, but let's just assume that there is a surplus about the same size. Let's say it's $1 billion. I think that there's opportunities, and we take a look at the tax bill that did not pass. There was some important tax cuts in there. I think that we should continue. They are designed for personal property tax relief, renters property tax relief. They're designed to eliminate the first $100,000 on every commercial industrial property across the state with respect to the statewide business property tax. I think those are good investments. I think we take a portion of it, we invest into transportation, and I think we take the rest of it and invest it into transportation.
Good, Donna, surplus.
Well, when I've been out door knocking again, when I ask people that question, what they tell me is that, that's money that should come back to us. So I think there's a certain percentage of the folks out there that feel like a budget surplus should somehow be a tax rebate to them. But I also think that part of that money could have been used for transportation. That if we were to look at using some of that money, it might have alleviated some of these budget shortfalls that we had in our transportation infrastructure. And as we look to these types of surplus monies, we know we have to keep a certain amount of money in our reserves, but how much money should be kept in that reserve, and so how much money could be given back to the citizens? I think that's a conversation that I didn't hear happen, and I would have loved to have heard happen.
Eric?
I think that's a great point. And we talk about, should we give this money back in the terms of rebates? And we oftentimes just remember back not too long ago, Jesse Ventura. We remember the days of everybody getting, $200 or $300 checks in the mail, one check, one time, and look at the disaster that it set our state up for the next 10 years. I mean, we're talking about budget surplus. That is the question. And it's been forever since we've talked about anything other than deficit spending. So this is a good time in Minnesota. We've got a structurally balanced budget, and I say we keep it that way.
Donna, last word?
Yeah, just to say that, you know, I don't think the government really should be in the business of taking more money than they really need. So if you have a surplus, you know, and we do have a balanced budget, you know, constitutionally, so just make sure that the balance is fair, so that if there is surplus money, it is intended for the purpose that it was raised, and if there's extra, that it should go back to the citizens.
I love my Jesse check, by the way. Vern, with a question that's very important to Duluth.
Local government aid has been criticized for being unfair to some communities and inadequate. What changes are needed to LGA?
We'll start with you, Donna.
Well, let me just say, in the Marine Corps, we'd say the LG is a real Class A head scratcher. I went to the website and looked it up, and it's this matrix of about 44 columns of information that get put in. And I don't have problems with complicated, you know, formulas, but what concerns me about that is whether all of those data that gets put in those columns is accurate. And if you look at some of them, it is, you know, houses that were built between 1940 and, you know, 1970, and so this complicated matrix goes on. And so what I'm concerned about is who really has oversight of that, and who's ensuring that all those numbers that are put in there are the right numbers, okay? And then when the money comes down to the city levels, you know, how is that money spent? And really the purpose of it was for any lawful expenditure, but it was intended for property tax relief. And I can tell you right now, I could use a little property tax relief, as could others that I've talked to on the campaign trail. So I would really look for us to have great oversight into how that LGA is established and how it is executed at the back end.
Thank you. Erik, LGA.
So LGA is really important to the city of Duluth. The amount of money that we get from the state makes up about 30% of the city's general fund budget, and that's just something that we could not overcome. In 2013, I was lucky enough to be part of the committee that actually worked on reforming our LGA formula. And it is complicated, but it's complicated for a reason. It's because it's incredibly important. And it's a little bit different for different sized cities. And what it's designed to do is meet the city's unmet need. In other words, your city is determined, you know, based on the services that it should provide, this is what it would cost, and this is what your property tax base can support, and what's not met is what your LGA ends up essentially being. It's incredibly important for the city of Duluth. I think it's important to point out that our LGA in 2003, before the Governor Pawlenty on allotments, was about $60 million more than it is today. So it would take us an additional $60 million just to get back to the 2003 levels.
Donna, 30 seconds.
Well, for communities that don't receive aid, it's usually because the formula determines that they have adequate ability to raise their own revenue or from a diversified tax base. So in 2016, out of 852 cities, 768 received LGA and 84 cities did not. So that means basically if you look at the numbers, half of the citizens of Minnesota received it and half didn't. So I know cities count on it, but I guess I'm wondering, is there a better way to raise revenues and have a better diversified tax base within your cities rather than relying on the government to give you a tax handout?
Final word on LGA, Erik?
I think it's really important to remember the history of LGA and why it came to be. The fact of the matter is that, and we have spent 2015 and 16 on the tax committee fighting back against Republicans that wanted to cut local government aid to St. Paul, Minneapolis, and the city of Duluth. And that is just insane to me. These are the cities that have the most unmet need, quite frankly, across the state. And they wanted to reduce the city's LGA to all three of those cities. And we spent the whole session working against that, and the tax bill that didn't pass actually had a slight increase to LGA.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Chris.
What are the two things the legislature can do this session to boost the economy in northeastern Minnesota?
Erik, we'll start with you.
There's a couple of things. I think we absolutely need to continue this effort to expand broadband, you know, good, adequate broadband across northeastern Minnesota. As we look at our economy, especially outside of the city, up towards the range and the more rural areas, broadband is an absolute necessity. The more money that we can put into that fund, the more money that those funds can be used to leverage federal funds and other private dollars from private providers. And we start to build out this system, that's going to be incredibly important towards economic development. And the other piece, you know, you asked for two, I think we need to absolutely look at rediversification on the Iron Range. We can't be afraid to talk about that. We know that taconite mining is what it is, it's cyclical, but we also know that the Iron Ranges would like to have some stable jobs and stable economy. And I think that we need to look at other opportunities to generate jobs and make those investments on the range.
Donna?
Well, I would like to see taxes reduced. I think that, our taxes are too high. Our corporate tax structure in Minnesota makes us one of the highest in the world. So if we could reduce our taxes, I think that would be really helpful for our business and would also invite more businesses to come here. What I hear also from our small businesses is that they need to loosen regulations and that there's too many regulations and restrictions, and so it's very difficult to run a small business, and I think small businesses are the backbone of our economy. I know when we were talking about switching from the MNsure to the MNCare to the MNsure back, there was a need to create a call center. And I remember discussing at a meeting, why can't that call center be here in Minnesota? I think it was sent to some other state. So to me, that was a great opportunity to have a call center up in northeast Minnesota, and that would have been a good opportunity for jobs for them as well, but that never came about. So having people at the state legislature look for opportunities like this for us in greater Minnesota, I think is really what's missing and what we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric, 30 seconds.
I often hear people talk about reducing regulations or reducing this burden on small business or corporations. And I will often ask when I have more than 30 seconds to talk about, just name 5. Name 5 of these regulations that are so burdensome. And people generally can't come up with one, let alone 5. The fact of the matter is that the state of Minnesota is well represented in the legislature by all sorts of people, from big cities to small cities to rural Minnesota. And we work very hard to make sure that the policies that we put into place are policies that make sense for everybody. And they're not necessarily overly burdensome. That idea that corporations pay too much taxes is not true. If corporations pay less taxes, that means the average citizen pays more taxes. It's not that there's room to cut services. We spend 40% of our budget on E12. We spend about 30% of our budget on health and human services. That's 70% of the state budget right there of places that nobody's going to touch.
Donna, final word?
Well, corporate tax structure is a flat rate of 9.8%, and then the top federal corporate tax rate is 39%. So that does show that Minnesota is one of the highest in the world for our tax rates. In Minnesota, we have the 4th highest personal tax rate and the 3rd highest business tax rate. So our taxes, I feel, are high, and I think it would be an opportunity to create more business structure if we had, or business opportunities if we had a less taxing infrastructure.
Thank you. Classy.
We've touched on a lot of issues here today. What do you think are the biggest issues facing the Minnesota legislature? What are your priorities, and how do you plan to tackle them?
Donna, I'll start with you.
Well, I think the biggest issue and my top priority is education. I think we are falling behind in graduating all of our students, and I think if we start focusing on educational opportunities, we're going to have a shortfall in our workers here in Minnesota, and rather than importing them, which is one of the conversations, we can grow our own and have our students graduating from our high schools and then moving right into good jobs. Again, I think taxes are high, and so taxes is a priority for me. We agree that, I know the legislature had passed in the bill for veterans retirement pay to not be taxed, and I think that would be an excellent place to start. I just talked to a veteran at the Lester River Rendezvous who's going to leave as soon as he's retired because his retirement pay is going to be taxed. Also, our Social Security. I think substance abuse is not only a community problem, it's a statewide problem, it's a nationwide epidemic. So we need to talk about our substance abuse and use tools that can keep that in check.
I do also agree that education is going to absolutely be one of our top priorities. This is the number one issue that I hear about at the doors. It's the number one issue that was tagged in the survey that we did, and it's about how do we improve education, public education for our kids. And the reality is that we talked about this a little bit before. We need to make sure that we're putting money in the right way into the formula to make sure that our class sizes can actually get a little bit smaller so that we can increase the number of people that are graduating. Beyond that, we need to look at the other socio-economic factors that come into play here. We need to make sure that we have adequate housing. We need to address homelessness. We need to make sure that people have transportation to and from school. We We need to make sure that when kids graduate from high school, that they have the opportunity to go to college without going into this super debt that everybody's talking about. And we have opportunities to do that here in Minnesota. You know, some people say that our tax rate, our corporate tax rate is just way too high. We are on the top 10 lists of best places to live, best places to raise a family, best places to go to work, best places to do this, that, and the other thing. And that's why, is because we as Minnesotans have the ability and the want and desire to invest in these things.
Donna, response to that?
Well, again, I think some of those best places to live are when you're, in the dominant culture, and when you're in the marginalized population. This isn't necessarily the best place to live, because you can't get good jobs, you can't get good education, you are marginalized, you can't get good health care. So I think that when we create these small jobs, and I even like to call them micropreneurs, when we have our small businesses, they have an opportunity to really engage with folks that they can train, or they can use in the way that works best for their small business.
Final word, 30 seconds.
Yeah, the small business is absolutely right. This is like the cornerstone of our development. This is where this legislature can make the smartest, not necessarily the largest, but the smartest investments into economic development across the state, whether we're in the metro area or anywhere in greater Minnesota, including right here in Duluth. Investing in our small business incubators makes the best sense, because these are the small businesses that actually grow our jobs. We look at rediversifying the Iron Range, it's going to come from small businesses, people that live on the range that have these big ideas.
I think that brings us to the end of our questions. I thank the candidates for Senate District 7 here in Duluth for being here. Republican Donna Bergstrom and the DFL candidate Erik Simonson. I thank those in attendance, those watching online. We will wrap up by offering each of our candidates up to 2 minutes to make your final pitch to voters. Why are you the best choice to replace Senator Reinert? And Erik, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you, Chuck, and thank you again to the editorial board for taking the time. I know it's late and you've had a long day, but I do appreciate the time and the opportunity to address Duluth through this forum, so thank you for that. What I want to do, folks, is just take everything that I've done the last 4 years in the House and bring that same work ethic, that same model, and carry it right into the Senate and start right on day one in January. I think that we have so much that we can look back on, that we've learned from, that we can carry forward into the next term, and we continue to do that. Minnesotans are in a better place now, and it's true that we need to do more work for our underrepresented communities, and we'll continue to do that. But nobody works harder for those folks than Democrats, quite frankly. Nobody does. Every day, it's always about how do we make life better for those that can't help themselves. And we will continue to do that, and I'm so happy to have the opportunity to be a part of that. I think that my 4 years in the legislature, I've spent building relationships with senators, House members, governor's staff, agency staff, advocates, lobbyists, and we have this incredible network put together where we can actually get some things done. And quite frankly, I've worked 2 years in the majority party and the last 2 years in the minority party, and I understand the differences. There are things that you just can't get done when you're in the minority party, but when you're in the minority party, you work smarter, you use strategy, and you can get things done. Of all the bills that I chief authored over the last 2 years in the minority, without the disaster of the end of session, over half of those would have passed. And I think that's just incredibly smart about how you forge relationships and who you forge them with. It's possible to get things done whether you're majority or minority party member, and I'm just happy to have the opportunity to try to go forward and work on behalf of Duluth in the Minnesota Senate. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, Donna Bergstrom.
Yes, thank you again to the Duluth News Tribune and the editorial board for hosting this forum, for listening to us here, and obviously those in the audience, and those of you that will watch us online. Thank you to Representative Simonson. I'd also like to thank Roger Reinert for his service as our District 7 state senator and having done so honorably, and so to him I say fair winds and following seas. As I stated earlier, I'm not a politician, but instead a common citizen concerned over the direction of our state. I've knocked on doors and attended meetings, talked with community leaders, and have been at community events to understand what is on the minds of our district residents. And in the years since I've returned to Minnesota, I've devoted much time to studying and understanding the issues that confront us as a community. But what can't be learned, from these briefing cards and my notes, and I'm a former intelligence officer, so I carry all this stuff with me. So I realize that what you can't learn from all this, briefing material is character traits, and character traits such as honesty, integrity, and leadership. And those are traits that I learned over my lifetime and that were honed as an officer in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. And I'm very proud to count myself among the few, the proud, and the Marines, and to have honorably served my country. As you have learned here tonight, I will bring a fresh perspective and a new voice to the conversation, and that I'm running for you, and I have no strings attached. I'll represent our voices and values, and not just those of a special interest in the PACs. And I'm truly honored to say that my commitment to putting people over other interests has resonated across our community. And I believe I speak from Gitche Ode, which is Ojibwe for a great heart. I understand that we live in the home of the free because of the brave, and I understand that freedom comes from a commitment to a constitution that was forged out of compromise and with a view towards higher ideals. So I'm able to take complex issues and present common sense solutions, and I'm knowledgeable, capable, and will work diligently to bridge the divides that have come to define our public discourse. So, Marines are known as lean, mean fighting machines, and so I no longer can say that I'm so lean or so mean, but I'm also a fighting machine, and I will fight for us down at the state legislature. So thank you very much.
Thank you both.